please call to order here for the special session of the special meeting, I should say, of the Nacogdoches Planning and Zoning Commission, November 29th, 2021. It is 3:04 p.m. And we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, so please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Next, we have an open forum. Not seeing anybody here, unless anybody. Do you all want to make any comments? No? Okay. Well, moving on then to number 4, the consent agenda. First item is approval of the minutes from the November 8th, 2021 P&Z meeting. Please review those and then make a motion either to approve as written or approve with edits or some other motion. Any comments or questions about the minutes? I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, those pass. Moving on. In the agenda, to the regular agenda, there was nothing removed from the consent agenda by commission action, so we're moving on to B, which is consideration, discussion, and possible action on a letter of support to update the Nacogdoches Comprehensive Plan and Downtown Master Plan.
All right, thank you. Chairman Elena Helton, City Planner. So a number of you have inquired about putting together a letter of support to be forwarded to City Council in regards to updating the city's comprehensive plan and the city's downtown master plan. And so initially we had scheduled the contract for the consultant to go to City Council on December 7th. And so in order to try to get the letter approved prior to that so we could forward that to council, we held a special meeting specifically for this item. As of this morning, that City Council date for the contract has been delayed slightly to mid-January, and we'll talk about that in more detail in just a minute, but just wanted to let you know that as we're going through the presentation, if there are some changes or modifications to the support letter that the commission wants to make, we do have time to make those prior to the actual contract approval. And so today we'll be just providing a brief timeline recap of what we've done so far, when we did it. We'll talk about the different projects and the scope of the projects. We'll talk about the city's RFQ process that we went through as far as requesting submittals for the various projects and then evaluating those and coming up with a finalist consultant. We'll talk about the actual contract elements, and then we'll actually talk about the specific P&Z support letter and actually have PDF and Word document versions that we can pull up and actually have like a small working session if we'd like to. And I believe Chairman also has a version that he's been working on that he wanted to share with the commission as well. Do you want to go ahead and pass that out at this time, Ken? And so the action before the P&Z today is to send a letter in support to the City Council to move forward with hiring a consultant to create a downtown master plan and update the city's comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan also including a housing needs assessment and an I-69 corridor plan. So as far as timeline, we initially brought this discussion forward to City Council in December of 2020. So we're just at a year. And we actually provided a long list of different studies and strategies to help further some of the city's current and future planning, engineering, and economic development efforts. And they included about 15 to 20 plans. Of those included an update to the comprehensive plan, downtown master plan, I-69 corridor plan, and housing needs assessment. And during that discussion, those four were recommended to move forward with the RFQ process and procurement process to hire a consultant. So we had those initial discussions in December 2020. We brought back more detailed information in January of 2021 to council. That's when we got the go-ahead to proceed with the comp plan and downtown plan RFQ process. In March, we actually issued the RFQs, and then in April, there was a panel review of those RFQ submittals, and then in May, we had an election. And so we did get a new city council member. And so in May, we also interviewed 3 consultant finalists for each study. And then at the end of May, we updated the new city council on the studies and where we were at in that process. In June, we actually had 2 public forums to talk about the downtown plan process and the comp plan process with the community. We also brought forward a work session as a follow-up to those public forums to city council to kind of let them know, hey, here's what we heard. Here's kind of the attendance that we had at these meetings. And then in September, we received additional direction to proceed with the council. We received additional direction to proceed with the contract after a work session that the council had with DTJ Design, which is the finalist. So that's just kind of like an overview of the timeline and what we've done so far. Like I said, initially we had scheduled the contract to actually go to City Council on December 7th, as well as the appointment of the steering committees. So during this process, staff recommended that we actually appoint 2 steering committees for each study. It's a citizen committee to help drive the process and work directly with staff and the consultant to make sure that public input feedback loop is staying open and transparent, and that the plans are moving in the right direction. And so on December 7th, we were going to take the contract forward and also take a resolution to appoint those committee members. And so we are going to move forward with the appointment of the committee members on December 7th, but the actual contract approval will be more in line with the mid-January meeting. And so immediately upon the appointment of the committee members, we'll have kind of staff orientation with them, go over governance, any kind of questions that they may have on the process or expectations, and then the consultant will actually have an orientation with those committee members as well. And we can go into more detail about that if you like, but just that's kind of an update on the timeline, where we're at and where we're going. And so the actual projects include the comprehensive plan update. Drink of water. So the comprehensive plan update is an update to our current 2003 plan. It'll include a review of current conditions of land uses, recommendations for future land uses, a future transportation plan, and then implementation strategies to actually implement some of those recommendations that come out of the plan. The current comp plan was adopted in 2003, which is a vastly different environment than the one we live in today, and that includes demographics, development patterns, economy, current technology. These are all different than they were 20 years ago. So a modern plan will help reflect these changes. The comp plan, like I said, also includes a I-69 corridor plan. This is a more in-depth study of the proposed I-69 corridor, which would include more specific recommendations on future land use, utility, and design suggestions. It'll also have recommendations to create development standards to support future development along the corridor. The comp plan update also includes a housing needs assessment, which will be a review of the city's current housing stock and then a projection of housing needs for the near and long term. And then we'll also include recommendations for solutions to encourage housing development in ways that are supported by the community. The downtown master plan is essentially a small area plan. It's kind of like a comprehensive plan, but on a much smaller scale. It's much more detailed. And so this will help create a vision for downtown Nacogdoches and create a framework for future ordinances and initiatives to help reinvigorate the downtown area. This plan will also include a market analysis to explore what type of new retail, entertainment, and housing exists, and then what is needed in the future and how to fill those gaps. And the last time we had a full downtown master plan was 1974. So that's just a brief overview of the different projects and scope of those. So why these studies? Like I said, our current comprehensive plan was completed in 2003. It's based on 2000 census demographics, which includes population, age, income, race, ethnicity, and housing. And like I said, our economic market is different. Our development patterns are different. The way people live and work is different. So it's important to have a plan that's based on updated data. It's also based on 1997 economic census, which includes industry, occupation, and employment. And as we know, the type of employment and the way people work and how they access their work is different than it was in 1997. Also, the comprehensive plan had recommendations for I-69, but the alignment of I-69 wasn't complete at that time, and the timing was uncertain. So the alignment that was shown in our current plan is actually different than what's being built today. Our annexation and tax laws have changed, so Texas cities in general have a lot more restrictions on their power to annex and tax properties, which really impacts what we think about as far as future land use and economic development strategies. We can no longer rely on property in our extraterritorial jurisdiction being annexed, so we really need to re-strategize how we promote different economic development projects. The school district has expanded their facilities. They passed a huge bond a few years ago and have really expanded their facilities, upgraded existing, and that's really changed the demographics of the community, and again, changes in development pattern. We've had new subdivisions, new apartments, new retail, and so the city physically doesn't look the same as it did in 2000. The downtown master plan, like I said earlier, was completed in 1974, and so again, it was based on data that doesn't really reflect current conditions, and there's some good recommendations in that plan, but we really need to make sure that the plan reflects, again, current conditions, current demographics. Some of those strategies may not be plausible or just outdated, and so during that review, we'll actually identify what current strategies can be taken forward, and so it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's really a review and then keeping the good things and then updating the things that need to be. So when we talk about this plan, really it's 4 different studies. It's the comprehensive plan, an I-69 corridor plan, a housing needs assessment, and a downtown plan. And so when we first took these to City Council, we actually talked about them as separate individual plans. And so we've had a lot of comments and feedback from the community about the cost of the plan as it relates to other cities who have done comprehensive plans. But when you look at the content and what's included, it really is a much larger scale, and it really truly is 4 different individual plans, but one comprehensive implementation strategy. And so being more strategic about how we implement these different plans in order to better utilize our resources and essentially try to get the best bang for our buck. It's economies of scale. The RFQ process. So like I mentioned earlier, in January 2021, we received direction to proceed with the RFQs for the comprehensive plan and the downtown plan. In March, we received those submittals. We received 13 different submittals for the downtown master plan and 10 for the comprehensive plan. Now, several of those were from the same firm. So the way that we wrote the RFQs, we actually recommended.
What's RFQ stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I'm using synonyms. Sorry. requests for qualifications.
Thank you.
I apologize. Thank you so much. So there's requests for qualifications and then requests for proposals. And so request for qualifications is more like a resume. Tell us about yourself, your skills, the different projects that you've worked on and why you qualify for this project. Whereas a request for proposals is a much more detailed a proposal that actually has budget information and timeline and so forth and so on. And so with the RFQ, you tend to get a more robust response because it's easier for those firms to submit those and they're less timely, whereas RFPs are much more time intensive, and so you may not get as robust of a response. And so like I said, we got 13 different submittals for the downtown plan, 10 for the comp plan, but several of those were for the same firm because we recommended that firms either apply for both or that there would be required a lot of coordination between the two. And so in order to create a seamless process, we did recommend that they submit for both, but it wasn't a requirement. So we did have some firms that only submitted for the comp plan and then some firms that only submitted for the downtown plan. Based on those submittals, we chose 3 finalists for each study and then requested that those finalists submit a more detailed proposal that included budget information, timeline, more detailed scope, and then their approach to the project. So we had 3 interviews for the downtown plan and then 3 interviews for the comprehensive plan. And then based on those interviews, the finalist was DTJ Design, which had submitted for both. They were the only finalists that submitted for both plans. And we actually had a work session with City Council in August to allow them to meet the consultant, talk about their approach, and get a better feel for the team that they were going to be working with on these projects.
Question for you.
Yes.
So the RFQ, they went through an RFQ process. Did they go to a subsequent RFP process too?
Yes, in a sense, it wasn't like a full-fledged formal RFP, but in their interview, we did request that they provide timeline, budget, and a more detailed scope and approach to their project. And so they did provide that information in the form of a presentation. And then we had some supplementary documents with that. But yes, essentially it was an RFQ, and then the finalists were requested to submit proposals. So it was kind of a 2-in-1. And so with that, you have a more robust submittal process, but you still get the benefit of that RFP, request for proposals. And during that process, you also get a feel for the personalities of the different team members and how well they may work with the city and just the community in general. And so we felt it was a good process. We were happy with the number and just the quality of submittals that we received, especially for a community of our size. Getting that many submittals is not common. And so we were really excited about the interest in working with our community. So after the work session with City Council in August, we had a follow-up discussion with City Council in September, and they gave us the direction to proceed with the contract for council consideration with DTJ Design. So the contract elements, again, it's 4 studies in one. So we have the downtown plan and the comp plan, which includes the I-69 corridor plan and housing study. So the different project tasks include project management and pre-planning, public participation, which is really the bulk of the scope of work. It includes about 27% of the process, not just in budget, but in time and man-hours and process. Comprehensive plan elements are kind of broken out into their own task, as well as the downtown master plan and the future I-69 corridor study. And then you have that overall comprehensive implementation strategy that ties them all together. And then the final task is that report writing, presentation, and adoption. And this is just kind of brief bullet points. Every task has subtasks. This is just a kind of broad overview of the different contract elements and what they entail.
Can we ask questions now, or do we need to wait till you
No,
finish?
absolutely.
Okay.
Please interrupt.
So was the community outreach and engagement, was that part of the original down select, when we down selected the 3 finalists and they submitted their pricing and timeline, was that part of that, or was that 27% cost added later due to community feedback?
No,
I'm
no.
sorry,
So we actually we have not engaged in a contract at this time. So we actually haven't spent any city funds with the consultant. The public forums that we had were kind of above and beyond. Once we got the discussion started and we were working with council to go through the RFQ process, we started getting a lot of questions about, well, what is a comp plan update? What's a downtown master plan update? Because it's been several years since we've done that. And so a lot of people either don't live here anymore, they weren't part of the original process, or it's been so long that it's too far removed. And so in order to try to provide some clarity with the community and just clear up some misinformation, we had those two public forums as an educational session. Information sharing, just providing clarity on what the process was, what we've done so far, just explaining that we haven't actually started the process yet, that there will be a robust public engagement, but that right now we're just in conversations about initiating the process. And so we haven't actually initiated the update process yet. Once we get the contract approved, then we'll actually work with the consultant to develop a public engagement plan, which will include those meetings and surveys and public forums and all those other different types of public engagement that comes with this type of process.
27% of the 450 is public engagement, correct?
Yes, correct.
Was that part of the original
No.
submission in March that was approved or recommended, March or whatever the date was?
That's a great question. So the answer is no. Based on feedback from City Council, they actually requested more public engagement than was what was initially proposed by the consultant. So every comprehensive plan process and downtown master plan process has some form of public engagement. Some cities are more robust than others. Typically, I think because that process can be so time-consuming and so expensive, it requires a lot of manpower. But City Council didn't want to compromise on that. So the amount of public engagement you see in this scope is really above and beyond what you would normally see, because they really wanted to make the effort to make sure that it was inclusive as possible, that it really represented the community in the broadest way. And so typically for any process, it is anywhere from 20 to 30%. But what you're going to see in this final draft is actually more than what you would typically see, or even that we saw in that first proposal, because of the input from City Council.
I'm sorry, last question.
Yeah.
When did DTJ update that 27% for public engagement?
This was probably done prior to the August work session. So they had submitted kind of like an initial scope, and then based on the feedback from council, we told them that's not enough, we need way more. And so what was presented to council during that August work session is really more reflective of what you see here. And I have another slide that kind of breaks down the cost and percentages in more detail. But and I'll have a pie chart too to kind of visually represent that. But almost in any process, especially one with this many elements, the public participation is kind of the biggest as far as time and budget, but I think ours is even more so than what you would typically see.
You answered my question. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, so this is the schedule of fees. So they've broken it down with percentages and subtotals, and then just an estimate on the hours. Basically, the final fee for the scope is just over $427,000, but then we take into consideration time, travel, and reimbursements. It rounds out to about $450,000. And so as far as funding sources, 50 of that will come from the Economic Development Fund, 50 will be provided by NEDCO, and so only about 350 will actually be the net of general fund revenue that will expend on that. So total it's 450, but city general fund will be more in line with the 350. And so that's kind of just a breakdown. Also, you see this 50 broken out with a description of market analysis, economic fee associated with the comp plan and I-69 corridor study. We're actually working with SFA to conduct that portion of the study. So we engaged SFA at the very beginning because we wanted them included in the process. Dr. McHale, who's the chair of the Economic Development Department, was actually on that panel that reviewed the RFQ submittals and interviewed the consultants and scored. And so we're actually working with them to develop a scope so they can conduct some of that economic market analysis of these studies. So they'll be integral to the process. That may happen during the process or at the tail end, but there's lots of comprehensive plans, because they're so high level, that don't have the benefit of a fully fledged economic market analysis. It's always beneficial, but you can still have a good comprehensive plan without that detailed analysis. We're still planning on conducting that, but it'll be SFA who helps us with that process. And so they're even more involved. And they're familiar with our economics, and so it just makes sense to have that partnership with them.
I see in the project scope a housing needs assessment, but I don't see any money to pay for that.
So that's incorporated into the comprehensive plan elements. The comprehensive plan will actually have a housing chapter.
Okay.
And it's also kind of tied into the downtown master plan. So the housing needs assessment will be a citywide assessment. And so that'll be incorporated into the comp plan elements and the downtown master plan elements. That's why you don't see it broken down or broken out separately. Thank you for mentioning that, because I did want to provide that clarification. All right, so just a visual breakdown of the contract. Again, public participation is 26 to 27%, not only in the budget, but just kind of in the process and timeline and man hours. Under that is really the downtown plan. Because it is an intensive plan, it's detailed. It really gets into the weeds of infrastructure and aesthetics and walkability. And it'll provide more detailed recommendations and strategies, whereas the comp plan is more high level and citywide. And so under that, you have the comprehensive plan elements, which is 17%, and then the I-69 corridor, which is 16%, and then it kind of just goes down from there. So just kind of chunking it together so you can visually see kind of the percentage of the different costs and time that's, that goes into these projects.
Question for you.
Yes.
Please.
Hmm?
Never done a city plan before, so a lot of questions here. Or participated in the process of one.
No, that's great.
Does the city plan cover, get down into the minutia of like, you know, I spoke to the city engineer. You know, we've got to have plans around water infrastructure, wastewater, all that, or we can't build subdivisions. So I get that. And he can't do anything without having a plan.
Yeah.
Does it get down to the minutia of, okay, you know, a neighborhood that has 300 homes is going to require X amount of infrastructure to support that 300 homes. Does this plan get into those kind of details, or does it stay much higher level?
So the city does have a model that they use whenever they're estimating the size of utilities, depending on a development proposal. So if you say that you're going to build 500 homes, here's kind of the size and breakdown of those different residential types. We actually have a model we can plug in and figure out what your water demands are going to be, which can help inform your infrastructure needs. So size of your water line, your sewer line. Now this plan will include utilities, so water, sewer, and drainage. The city is already working on a separate water and sewer master plan and drainage master plan, which will be incorporated into this plan. So this plan will include a utilities chapter, which will tie in those more detailed master plans and make sure that the implementation strategies take those into consideration. So it'll have more high-level master plans for your major lines, but it won't get into the weeds as far as, you know, Tractor Supply needs a 1.5-inch line. Right. You know what I mean? So it will take it into consideration at a higher level and include those city capital project for water, sewer, drainage, and will incorporate those other plans that are already underway, including a master plan that we've already engaged an engineering firm with for water, sewer, and drainage. So those will be more detailed.
You were talking about electrical that DTJ will look at. Do they just talk about where lines go, or do they actually, is there any kind of, I get the water, do they delve down into any details relative to electric or? We
will in the downtown plan. So electric is a franchise utilities. That means it's privately owned and maintained. But we're going to work directly with the utility company to get that data. So whenever we're looking at new sidewalks or new streets or new water and sewer, we'll actually have the plans for what's in the ground as far as electrical. Yes, and so that'll be reflected, so that way it could be taken into consideration when we're talking about relocating lines or upsizing lines or because you don't want to have those conflicts with private and public utilities. And so we will work directly with that franchisee to get that data so it's reflected in the plan. Normally, they don't share that information, but in this process, it's in their best interest to coordinate those improvements. And so for the downtown plan, we will have that specific information. It'll be reflected in the plan.
Well, I'm building a 10,000 square foot hangar at the airport, and the city, the engineering that goes into it is a lot of money, just to get plans to do it.
Yeah.
So, but I was wondering how detailed it got into it, so.
Yeah, like I said, the comprehensive plan is more citywide, high level. The downtown plan really gets into the weeds about size and location and various scenarios on what that looks like, and then changes based on those scenarios. So there'll actually be a scenario design charrette process where they'll actually put together visuals of, well, if we did this here, that's what that looks like, and it requires an 8-inch line. If we change that use to retail, it's going to require a 6-inch line. I mean, it'll really kind of get into the details of those kind of improvements.
So in partnership with Steve and his team and DTJ, they'll actually put that into this.
Yes, and they have contracted with KSA. That's one of their sub-consultants who have done almost all of our infrastructure plans. Michael Delaney is another sub-consultant, and so they have vast experience with Nacogdoches, and so it really is a resource because they're not starting from scratch. They have those consultants in-house to help facilitate that process, and we know all the players involved, so hopefully it'll create a more seamless process.
I'm familiar with Michael's work and the other group too with the airport, so, okay, great, that
I
helps.
can also help them with some of their drainage problems in their plan.
All right, well, Steve Bartlett's not here today, but I'll be sure to pass on
Pass
that
it on to
information.
them. I can help them.
All right, we will.
Personal knowledge.
Yeah.
So is the end goal there then, so hypothetically, you look at the comprehensive plan and it says here on Park Street, for example, east of University, we think this should be single-family residential or high-density residential or something, but right now there's just 1 2-inch water line, or maybe the sewer doesn't extend because it's just been a big field in that area that far. Is it going to say, is it that kind of information that the city needs to be able to invest money in those kind of infrastructure developments, or?
Yes, so, part of the benefit of a comprehensive plan is it takes multiple elements into consideration. It's the idea of, the relativity of things, and so everything is connected. And so you can't talk about utility infrastructure without talking about land use. You can't talk about land use without talking about transportation, because they're all interconnected. And so if you're wanting to make deliberate choices about where and when you invest your water and sewer lines, well, it's best to have an idea of what's going to be there, right, and plan for that. And so if your comprehensive plan says that on Park Street, we're going to have a 30% increase in multifamily, we're going to plan for that and designate that area, well, then we probably need to upsize that 2-inch to a 6-inch. And then you want to have a timeline for when that happens and a priority list. And so based on the city's priorities and values that come out of that plan, you start ranking those projects. And then when developments come forward for a recommendation, you use that plan and that timeline to make choices as far as timing of approvals. And so it all kind of ties in together. And so the idea is if you have $100 worth of projects and you only have $50, where are you spending your money to get the biggest bang for your buck? Essentially, your highest return on investment. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And riding on his question, so that's, there's a residential recommendation for a certain part of the community that's whatever, residential, single family or multifamily, whatever the case may be. Absent someone having to go pay for it, will the plan show that to support that you'll need this kind of infrastructure in place to support that neighborhood? Whether whether the city spends money to do it versus another project, but does it lay it out?
So the idea is your transportation plan and your utility plan complement your land use plan. So if your land use plan shows a higher intensity or density of land use in one area, where your utility plan reflects that, either by more or larger infrastructure. And now if you have an area that you're showing to be protected or reserved or to limit development, it wouldn't make sense for your utility plan to reflect a new 12-inch water line in that area. And so basically by coordinating those together, you plan for infrastructure where you're planning for that additional intensity and development. And then where you're not going to be doing that, you don't propose anything. And so does that answer your?
It does, but let's say
Yeah.
at the end of the day, this plan comes out and there's a recommendation for neighborhoods in a certain area or
Yeah.
multifamily. Will it have a recommendation of the infrastructure needed to support that residential development?
So what we'll look at when we get those requests is we'll look at the future land use plan to see like, okay, based on the new plan that we just adopted, what does it recommend for this area? And the utility plan for that area should reflect whatever land use that is. And so essentially it's future. And so you may have a plan that shows multifamily, but that's not for 5 or 10 years. And so your utility plan may show a master sewer line, but you haven't built it yet. So timing is everything. And so you may get a proposal, but the timing's not right unless that developer is willing to install that infrastructure for you. And so the utility plan really shows city investments. It doesn't reflect the infrastructure that private developers will typically build with a new subdivision. So with a brand new single-family subdivision, typically it's the developer who's installing and building the streets, the water, the sewer. City capital projects tend to be more for commercial development, your high density, whereas single-family and those developments tend to be built by the private developer. And it changes. It's not a cookie cutter. But yeah, the master plan is what the city intends to build over a 20-year span, and depending on the priorities that come out, maybe we plan on building sewer line on Park Street in the first 5 years, new sewer line on University in 10, and we're actually in the process of developing CIP plans, so that those are like your 5-year capital improvement project plan that says, all right, in 5 years, here's our different projects, here's where we're gonna build them, and those should also reflect your comprehensive plan. And so if someone's proposing a development and we don't have it planned for 5 years, well, it may not be time to approve that development unless they're going to be supplementing the cost with their own construction. So the idea is it all kind of ties in together and they're all complementary. And when you have a current plan, it makes it easier to make decisions on whether you're supporting a development or not. And maybe it's not necessarily supporting, but what are you promoting? What are you encouraging? What is the city participating in versus someone just coming in and proposing to build all the development for you? So that makes a difference too.
Thank you.
And I know there was just some sewer line, I think it was a sewer line replacement over here on North Street that were apparently like 100 years old. That's what I heard.
Yes, we have a lot of aging infrastructure.
And so there's things that need to be replaced too,
Yes.
I would assume. So knowing, hey,
Yeah.
this area, this I-69 corridor, we would like, this is where the Walmarts and the strip malls and those things should be moved or in the future. Well, then maybe if we have a 5-year plan that says that's probably what we're going to encourage there, then we need to make sure that we can accommodate that.
Yes.
Going
And-
forward, I would think.
Yeah, and so
Because I don't know what the utilities look like over there, but I'm guessing it's pretty piecemeal.
Yeah. So the utility plan, if you look at our current utility plan, it actually includes existing and proposed. So it includes like brand new sewer lines and upgrades of existing. And so, you may have, like I said, a 2-inch water line now, but in the future, this is going to be a huge development corridor. And so you want to make sure you upgrade that now to get it ready for that development, to make sure that when the development comes, you can accommodate it.
Right. Or if you're replacing something already,
Yes.
you might as well put in the size that you think you're going to need.
Yes,
for the future.
it's that dig once
Yeah.
mentality. If you're replacing it, why don't you upsize it? Because the cost difference tends to be minimal when you're talking about all the work that's needed for design and construction. Increasing the size of a water line really doesn't add that much additional cost. And so the I-69 corridor plan that's going to be part of the comprehensive plan will also provide kind of that more in-depth analysis of future infrastructure, access, utilities, things like that, because we know it's coming. We want to make sure we're ready for it whenever it gets here, and we're not scrambling to keep up. So, all right, you guys ready for the next slide? Okay, so in your packet, we provided a fact sheet, And that fact sheet basically was just a synopsis of information about this process. So it included background information, kind of how we got to where we are, details on the scopes of the projects, and then kind of a support and opposition. So we've talked about over the last year different reasons why we should update the plan, and then we've heard some concerns from citizens who are in opposition for it. So we provided some information on both of those in your packet, and we'll go over that just briefly here. So as far as benefits of the plan, current plans identify new issues as they emerge, while others are no longer relevant. So it's normal to do an entire rewrite or update of a comprehensive plan every 20 years or so, especially when you haven't been kind of doing those regular updates every 1 to 5 years. And like I mentioned earlier, our demographics, development patterns, economy, they're all vastly different than they were 20 years ago. And so a current comprehensive plan will help reflect those different changes. Just to put it into perspective, and we put some of this information in the packet too. When the current comp plan was written, the .com bubble had just burst. Smartphones didn't exist, and social media was in its infancy. And so just think about cell phones and email and social media and how all of that has really redefined how we live and work and communicate with each other.
I read the
Oh.
plan from 20 years ago, 19, 18 years ago, whatever it is, front to back, several times. I hope it's not germane for today, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I hope this plan would be much more detailed
Mm-hmm.
and comprehensive, because that
Yeah.
may have been good back then, but it doesn't serve any purpose today of what's written in there that
Yeah.
I saw.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. So the current comp plan really is very aspirational in nature. It doesn't have a lot of concrete recommendations that give the who, what, when, where, how. And so it says, well, you should do this, but it doesn't talk about timing or who's responsible for it or how much it's going to cost or things like that. And so what we're seeing now with these newer comprehensive plans is that they have SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, they're actionable. They have a timeline and they're results driven. And so with this particular update for the downtown and the comprehensive plan, really you're getting this overall implementation strategy, which will have very specific action items that talk about who does what, when they do it, who's going to pay for it, and the timeline. So you'll have kind of your 1 to 5 year action items and then 5 to 10 year. And so it'll be much more detailed and really be something that you can hit the ground running with. And so that's one of the goals of this plan, is to really have something that's just more practical and more useful, so that whenever I'm gone in 5 years or you guys are gone in 5 years, no one has to think about, well, who do we decide was going to do that and where we're going to get the money for it. And so it'll take into consideration all those things and just, give us some better tools for implementation. One of the other benefits, like you mentioned, is maintaining relevance. So ensuring that your plans continue to reflect the overall goals of the community. The bulk of the work, ours, really is updating the demographic projections, analysis of current conditions, market analysis, and then those future land use, utility, and transportation plans. Again, the 2003 plan was drafted in a much different environment than the one we live in today. Cell phones, email, online shopping, mapping. I don't know about you, but I've never used a paper map to go anywhere. I've always used my phone. And I was having a conversation the other day with...
I like paper maps,
yeah,
but I'm old.
But I wouldn't even know how to, I could probably figure it out, but just the way people navigate and the way they travel. And so it really does have a huge impact. So whenever we're talking about maintaining relevancy, it's not just demographics and development patterns. It's all those things that really have had an impact on not just Nacogdoches, but nation and globally. Public support, a periodic review, and community feedback is an opportunity to affirm the public's ownership of a plan and make sure that it remains strong. When you talk about being socially engaged and representative, cell phones and social media really have changed the way that people are engaged. allowing all segments of the population to be reached in a way that we've never really been able to do before, and in a way that probably wasn't reflected in the engagement process in the 2003 plan. And I do want to say that there are some good recommendations in the 2003 plan, but some of them are outdated or they're just impractical, especially based on current conditions. And so whenever we're going through this process, there will be a review of the current plan, and any recommendations that are still found valid after exposing them to our 2021 conditions that are still supported by the community, we'll take those forward. And so we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We're saying, okay, well, what's good that we want to keep, and what do we need to amend, add, revise? And so that's kind of how the process will go. Some of the opposition that we've heard include the cost of the project compared to other cities. Like I mentioned earlier, when you look at, for instance, City of Lufkin did a comprehensive plan, and it was more in line with the $250,000, but it was just a comprehensive plan. It didn't include a detailed downtown master plan. It didn't include an in-depth study of the I-69 corridor, and it didn't include a housing needs assessment. So the scope of that project was much more limited than what we're getting with our plan. So it's not just a comprehensive plan, it's really 3 plans in one. Also, when you compare it to other cities, our public engagement that we're seeing in this plan is much more extensive than what you might see with other traditional plans. That was emphasized with City Council, and they just wanted to make sure that we got as much public input as we could in the process, and that it was worth the expense of that additional cost. Heavy public engagement in this process not only ensures that the concerns and desires of the community are heard, but also provides an opportunity just to bring together the community and hopefully provide some common ground where we maybe otherwise wouldn't have it. So one of the other concerns was using non-local consultants, and recommendations on utilizing SFA to complete this study. And so we actually had a SFA rep sit on our panel and talk to council about that and kind of what their capacity was and their level of expertise at the university. And essentially, SFA does have a lot of experts in a variety of fields, but they don't have the expertise to prepare a municipal comprehensive plan. A comprehensive plan takes a team of professional planners, engineers, economists, market specialists, architects, and while SFA has some of these experts, the faculty and staff, they certainly don't have the time to complete this process, especially on a volunteer basis. And so we have engaged them to complete some of the economic market analysis for us, but they don't have the full expertise to complete a comprehensive plan, nor have they volunteered any of those services. The other is our current infrastructure needs. We talked about aging infrastructure earlier, and some of the improvements that you've seen are because we've received breaks and damages, so we have to repair them versus something that's been included in like a long-term plan. So several of the comments that we've heard have indicated that the money should be spent on infrastructure versus this plan. And so $450 for a comp plan really is dwarfed when we talk about the infrastructure needs of the city for water, sewer, drainage. And not that $450 is insignificant, but when you look at the demands and needs of our infrastructure overall, it's a drop in the bucket. And so directing the money towards infrastructure construction really won't have a significant impact on our infrastructure needs. A long-term capital improvements plan that identifies future utility upgrades and maintenance, like we talked about earlier, is that kind of next logical step in the comp plan process. And we're actually ahead of the game. We've already started that process, and so it'll tie in with the comprehensive plan. And so those are just kind of the 3 main concerns that we've heard, and we did include some responses to those in your packet.
Question for you.
Yes.
The initial budget and timeline offered by DTJ,
Mm-hmm.
How much of the cost represented, how much of that initial cost represented public engagement of their proposal? And how much did it obviously went up to 27%. So
Yes.
We know that number, then we know
I wish I had that chart in front of me. It was more like low 20s, like high teens.
Was there initial public and was that part of the RFQ/RFP process, asking for a public engagement component to their bid?
Yes, so once we selected the 3 finalists for each one, we asked them to provide a presentation and participate in an interview process. And part of that presentation was their methodology and approach, which included their approach to public participation and public engagement and the different tools and different things that they used as part of that, and preliminary cost. And so their preliminary cost for that section was much less than we initially, than what you see now, based on that feedback that we got from City Council.
This 27% wasn't an afterthought, or the public engagement part wasn't an afterthought to the RFP, it was part of the process.
It was.
Can you shoot us that information?
Yes, I will. And so I'll be sharing some other information with you after this meeting. But Juan, do you mind making a note to include that in the follow-up? Yes. Well, I think I have some PowerPoint slides that kind of show that, and so we'll share that with the commission.
Clearly, I mean, many of us have conversations with our peers in the community and citizens, so it's good to socialize the facts, and
Yes.
people can make a determination of where they lie up on that at the end of the day. But
Yes, and I was going to mention, and I think I had it in here. So initially, we had proposed about $400,000 for the overall cost, and that additional 50 that you see, the bulk of that is public engagement. So just think about that difference, because time, man-hours, just.
that would represent about 17% or so approximately on the initial.
Mm-hmm. And we did try to be as resourceful as possible. So having, as the consultants are traveling here, having multiple meetings during one session, kind of double dipping, so to speak, and trying to get as much out of the team as we could while they were physically here. But we'll also have some remote meetings. We'll have some online engagement, things like that. So it won't be 100% online, because there's so many people that don't come to the meetings, that either because they don't have the ability because of childcare or work schedules or what have you, or just convenience, or they don't feel comfortable in a public setting. Not everyone feels comfortable standing at a podium and sharing their thoughts in front of a group of strangers or a group of their peers. And so that really helps capture that group that maybe wouldn't otherwise feel comfortable or even have the ability to participate in that process. Yep. So, but yes, we will share that information with the commission. We'll share
The
that.
cost is about, with the cost and the hours, it's around about 150 to 160 per hour is what they charge.
I can't remember offhand. They do have a rate. Do you?
157.
Yeah.
That was 150 something.
157 is what I'm sure.
Yeah. And these consultants are experts in their field, and they include,
That's a loaded grade
planning,
analysis,
architecture, engineers, and the public participation group. They are experts in public participation, and so we want the best of the best. We don't want anyone cutting their teeth on our plan. We want someone who's experienced, who has that expertise, and so essentially you kind of get what you pay for.
That's a fully burden rate. There's no, and that to me, that's not alarming, but I'm in the government world, so it speaks, particularly if it's a loaded rate. But there's no reimbursables here. I mean, this is all in 450 or whatever it is, 477.
Yeah, 450 is the cap, which includes reimbursables. So it shall not exceed
477.
450.
450.
Mm-hmm.
So that's their travel. That's everything in there.
Correct.
Okay.
And so we really negotiated with them to try to figure out how we could get as much cost saving as we could. And so that's one of the benefits of hiring local consultants or local sub-consultants, helps offset that cost, especially time, reviewing plans, traveling, attending meetings, things of that sort. So. All right. So our last slide is essentially the options for consideration. So we can proceed with the letter of support as presented, or amend or modify the letter. I actually have Word versions of that we can pull up. Ken has provided a version of his own and shared those with the group. I don't necessarily think we should sit here and just read through it and try to make a lot of changes this evening. But like I said, we have pushed that contract approval date to mid-January. And so we do have time to make changes or modifications or revisit this on the 13th if the commission wants to incorporate any additional language or make changes to that document before we forward it on to City Council. And so at this time, I'll open it up for questions and direction from the commission.
I have a question before we address the letter, please.
Okay.
And you ran the RFQ process?
Yes.
Did anyone with the city or that were selected on the panel have any other prior relationship with DTJ that was disclosed?
Yes, but let me provide some explanation. So the actual panel, the planning department facilitated the process, but we weren't actually on the review panel who graded and scored and interviewed the team. Our city engineering department also acted as a liaison and consultant, but they did not participate in the scoring or evaluation of the teams. And so the actual evaluation team consisted of Mario Canizares with the city manager's office, Larissa Philpott with NEDCO, Dr. McHale with SFA economic department, Jessica Sal, who's our historic sites and Main Street manager, and Brian Bray, who's our community services director. And so planning facilitated the process, set up meetings, shared information, scheduled, but we didn't actually score or evaluate. And same thing with engineering. They were there as a consultant and a liaison, but they didn't actually score or evaluate the proposals. Our engineering our engineering department does have a previous affiliation with one of the sub-consultants for DTJ, but they didn't, which is one of the reasons why they actually didn't participate in the scoring or evaluation or anything like that. And so.
Subs are local, so I mean, I would imagine everybody's, I mean, a lot of people have had interaction with those two, but.
Yes.
But anybody with specifically to DTJ, not their sub-partner?
Oh, no.
Nobody, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I had actually never heard of DTJ Design until we received the submittals. I know they have a team in Texas, and they've done Texas work, but when you work in different areas of Texas, you tend to get some repeat consultants that you work with on a regular basis. And some of these firms are very niche, which means they do what they do, and they do it really, really well, but it's very specific as to what they do. And so it's not every day that the city goes through a comprehensive plan update process or a downtown plan process. And so it's not surprising that, you wouldn't work with them on a regular basis. So.
You never know.
Never know. Never know. All right. Any questions of the commission? Would you like for me to, I can pull up the actual letter if you like, or we don't have to take any action this evening. If the commission would like additional time to review, maybe even provide some red lines, take a chance to review Ken's document, and then we can always revisit this at the December 13th meeting as well. And we can take your comments in the meantime. And so it's really up to the commission on how you'd like to proceed. Or we can just proceed as presented. I know, Ken, you want to talk about some of the changes that you included in your version?
Yeah, we talk about it real quick. Essentially, just wanted to focus on what I thought were the most, your proposed letter was very good, but it's kind of general in its scope, and basically kind of says, here's a bunch of reasons why we need this, which, I personally think are correct. But since this is coming from our commission, I thought it should be tailored more to, well, how would having a new or an updated plan benefit us, or how does not having one harm us in what we're tasked to do? So And I thought it's interesting that our zoning code literally says that it's supposed to implement the comprehensive plan. That's in the first section, which I'm not sure it's doing a good job of that at this point, or if it is. I mean, I think it's more often than not I've seen where you get something and you say, well, this doesn't fall in line with when you're giving your staff recommendation, this doesn't match our comprehensive plan, but we still think it's good. And so I feel like a lot of times we're just kind of, shooting from the hip and making decisions based on what we think is the right course forward, which isn't, I don't think, good for a long-term planning. Maybe, who knows, maybe we're making the best decisions every time, and when we approve or deny something, but I prefer to have something to refer to where we're really just saying, okay, the city's already decided they want this to be an industrial park, and that's what we're going to put there, and we're going to not approve this zoning change to a subdivision because it doesn't make sense for the plan. That's an extreme example, but I think that those are the kind of issues that are going to come up as the interstate comes through, as there's more development happening. And so right now I think it's so far behind considering those issues that, as a zoning commission, I don't care who's sitting up here, they're going to just be substituting their own judgment for what could be a well-reasoned and thought-out plan that doesn't currently exist.
Of course, any plan is somebody's best guess of what's going to happen in 20 years.
It's true.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what's going to happen 20 years from now, so.
Yes, but it does help to have a current plan, not just to reflect current conditions and demographics, but for that community support and that community buy-in. So when we do have a zone change request, people
I
have a
agree,
better
for
understanding
yeah.
of, okay,
Right.
why did we do this? And I remember that meeting, and and so you get more buy-in and generally more public support versus this kind of us versus them conflict, especially in these older areas where we're seeing a higher demand for redevelopment and things like that.
It could be helpful for infill development too, because you want to know, well, if I spend money to put a subdivision here, are these going to be sellable lots, or are we going to get, some new OSB plant next door that we didn't anticipate?
Yeah, and I will note that this particular comp plan update will really have an emphasis on neighborhood preservation, whereas our current plan really doesn't. It talks about neighborhoods and has some kind of general strategies, but it really doesn't talk about neighborhood preservation, neighborhood protections, compatible transitional development, whereas there will be a more dominant focus on that with this plan, so that way it's not a no, it's a yes if, right? And so there's a way to provide infill and provide redevelopment that's complementary to the neighborhood and adds value without detracting from that quality of life. But we don't have anything in our development standards to reflect that. And so when you're talking about even updating your development standards, your zoning ordinance is supposed to be in line with your comprehensive plan. And so the strategies that are in there, again, some of them are good, but some of them are really outdated. That plan talks about incorporating manufactured homes into established single-family neighborhoods. I can imagine anyone who would be on board with that today. And so, making sure that it's current. Yeah.
We have that issue.
So we have a lot of grandfathered properties because we're the oldest town in Texas, but actually recommended future doing that, continuing that practice, not just things that are grandfathered in, but intentionally incorporating kind of that diversity in housing, which I don't think really reflects the values of our current community. So things like that. Like I said, some of the things in there are really good, but some of them are just impractical or outdated or just no longer reflect the values of our community today. And Ken, I would just like to comment, there's another meeting in here at 4.
Okay.
That actually may have been delayed. So what I would actually like to pose is to pick this back up at the December 13th meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Allow the group to digest. We'll actually email you a copy of the PowerPoint as well, so you can process that and review it in your own time. And then we'll pick this back up on the
It'd be
13th.
good to have, I think, everyone involved
Yes,
too, and get
yes.
Willie back, but I
Now,
think-
Ruth, I know you said you won't be able to be present, but I'm glad you were here today so you could benefit from the
Yeah, send
presentation.
me-
And if you could remote in, we can accommodate
Yeah,
that.
I think I'm gonna be on the road, but, yeah.
But I
I'm
would like to say that
hopeful.
well, and if you have any comments or revisions or anything in the meantime, just feel free to send them to us. And then we'll present those as a group to the commission and include it in a packet so everyone can kind of see the different changes and recommendations from the various commissions. So don't wait till the 13th to send us a red line or send us your own kind of draft or what have you, so.
Rhonda, I'll be here.
Yeah. All right, well, with that, Ken, do you want to go to the next item?
yeah.
Adjourn?
Is it, we just adjourn, right?
Well, we have,
Another one.
there's that one last item that's
Oh.
kind of a catch-all.
Yeah, did
for
we have
things.
discussion of any future, possible future, agenda items?
No, I think the main thing was just letting you guys know that we do plan on moving forward with the appointment of these committees on December 7th.
Oh.
But the actual contract for these plans has been delayed till mid-January, so we can have more of that orientation with the committees first. And really have that introduction with them, so that way when the contract comes, they're more prepared and familiar with the process. And so that's all that we have.
How was the committee selected?
So we had an appointment, or sorry, we had an application process. So we had an online application, and we received many more applications than the number of available spots on these committees. And so it wasn't an application process. And then city council actually took that list, and each council member chose 2 for each committee. And then other members that we're moving forward with were chosen based on their affiliation, either with the SFA or the school district or some other civic group, to make sure that we had a good representation on the committees for the different sectors of the community.
Hopefully some opposing views are on the committees.
Most certainly there are.
Okay, good.
Yes. All right, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Ken, would you like to, it's not my meeting.
Yeah, anything, anybody want to add anything to the next meeting, or, no? Okay. All right, well, then I think we're done.